A question atheists frequently ask apologists is, why does the Old Testament portray Yahweh, who we are told is all-loving and perfectly good, as someone who likes to kill so many people? Why, for example, did he order the slaughter of the Canaanites?
This is a big one we get all the time, and you probably get it too. God is immoral for killing the Canaanites. Well, is God immoral for killing the Canaanites? The first question you're going to ask somebody is, if there is no God, why is any Old Testament atrocity wrong? Why? Because if they're coming from an atheistic perspective, they have no objective means to judge the God of the Bible as evil.
Turek asks this because he thinks it's a gotcha question. His argument essentially is, if Yahweh did something wrong, then that means there's an objective standard of right and wrong, which has to be a God, therefore a God exists. Checkmate, atheists. However, when Yahweh ordered the killing of the Canaanites, this didn't just seem to be inconsistent with some subjective secular judgment of morality. It seems inconsistent even with Abrahamic standards of morality. If Yahweh exists, and Yahweh ordered the killing of innocent Canaanite children, as the Bible portrays, then Yahweh violated his own prohibition against murder. Killing children because of their parents' corrupt culture is murder. Frank might say, by what standards can you, an atheist, judge Yahweh's actions to be immoral? My answer would be that they are immoral by Yahweh's own standards.
Because again, there's no evil unless there's a standard of good. But if they say, let me grant you there's God, why would such a God do such a thing? Fair question. Problem for us, apparently, right? So the next thing I normally ask is God arbitrary, or does he give reasons for judging people in the Old Testament? Is he just like kind of a cosmic mafia boss where he wakes up one day and he says, Canaanites, want them dead, kill them? Is that what he does? No. Does he give reasons for this? 400 years of this inequity, right? He's trying to warn them, get out of the land and stop these evil practices. In fact, who is this? Does anyone know who this is? I know Ted does. Who is this? Molech. That's Molech, right? One of their deities, and if you notice right here, Molech, you see the baby, you see the fire. They were sacrificing their babies to Molech. The baby sacrifice, child sacrifice. They were also engaged in bestiality and all sorts of other abominable behaviors. And God is saying, stop this for 400 years, and they don't relent. They continue to do it. This culture gets so evil.
See, this is exactly what I'm talking about. Yahweh got mad at the Canaanites for, among other things, killing their children, so he then orders the killing of them and their children. This is clear hypocrisy. Now, Frank might say that's different. Yahweh had a good reason to order that those children be slaughtered. What could possibly be a good reason to order the slaughter of children? How could the fact that Canaanite culture was corrupt constitute such a reason?
Now, how many times, by the way, have you heard atheists say, why doesn't God stop all the evil? Like the guy at Michigan State. Why doesn't God stop all the evil? They complain that God doesn't intervene in the tsunami. God doesn't intervene in the, stopping Hitler. God doesn't intervene in whatever. God doesn't intervene. Why doesn't God intervene? And then here God intervenes and they're complaining about it.
Frank seems to think that it's hypocritical to complain about both no intervention and shitty intervention. It isn't. By complaining about neglect, you are not forfeiting your right to complain about incompetence.
You notice that? God does intervene. He intervenes here, and they're complaining about. Why complain that God doesn't stop evil, but then complain when he does? Because everybody agrees the Canaanites were evil.
I don't agree that their children were evil, and even if every single adult Canaanite was evil, which strains credulity, Yahweh had the power to simply make them painlessly vanish instead of ordering them to be violently slaughtered. Even if wiping out the Canaanites were for some reason necessary, ordering his followers to do it in the most violently possible way seems like an entirely pointless imposition of suffering.
All right, next question is this. Is God committing murder by ending lives on earth? That's the key question right there. Is God committing murder by ending lives here on earth? Can God commit murder? No, why not? God is the author of life. He has the right to take it.
Why? This seems like a total non sequitur to me.
God is the only one that can create life, and therefore he's the only one that can take life. God's the only one that can kill and resurrect. In fact, nobody really dies. We just change locations. We do die biologically, but we don't die eternally. We're eternal beings now. We've gained eternity since we've been created, I mean, if the Bible's true, obviously, if the Bible's true. So God transitions us from one life to the next.
Even if that's the case, I still take issue with the way in which the Canaanites were wiped out. Even if Yahweh didn't murder the Canaanites, by asking that they be slaughtered instead of just making them painlessly disappear, he did order them to be tortured, including their children. William Lane Craig says that because the children automatically go to heaven, Yahweh did them a favor by ordering them to be killed. But even if that's the case, why did he have them killed in such a painful way as ordering his followers to cut them to pieces with their swords?
So the bottom line, it seems to me, is God has the right to usher people into the next life, whether they are 2 years old or 82 years old. People never die, they just change location. And God has that right. We don't have that right, but God has the right. Greg has pointed out before, when we use the term playing God, what does that mean? Yeah, who lives and dies? This comes up in capital punishment. Who are we to decide who lives and dies? Well, that question or that assertion, we ought not play God, presupposes that if you're God, you can do that kind of stuff, right? You can decide when people live and when people die. In fact, Ravi Zacharias many years ago was on a radio station in Ohio. He was doing a talk at Ohio State, and somebody called into the radio station and said, "Oh, you Christians, they're the same thing. You just want to impose your morality on other people," referring to abortion. You know, she went on and on and on. "You just want to impose your morality." And Ravi said, whoa, we haven't even brought abortion up. He said, "But let me ask you a question. On every college campus I go to, I get a question about if God, why evil? A plane crashes, some people die, other people live. Why would God arbitrarily decide to kill some people and let other people live?" You know, I always get that question. He said, "But when we," or he says, "God is immoral for letting some people live and other people die." He said, "But when we decide who lives and who dies through abortion, somehow that's a moral right." He said, "Can you justify this for me?"
I'd rather be an aborted fetus than a woman forced to give birth against her will. That's why I want abortion to be legal.
He said that was the end of the conversation. She hung up the phone. What could she do? When God plays God, we're complaining. When we play God, we have the right to do that. One other point I think you need to make is that the Old Testament theocracy was unique and temporary. It was not the ideal for all time, but the means to a promised new covenant. In fact, Jesus even points out that some of the Old Testament laws were not ideal for all time. In what context does he do that? On divorce, right? He says that it shouldn't have been, but due to the hardness of your heart, Moses granted you divorce. But that's not the ideal. So the Old Testament is not the ideal. It's not the ideal for us. And it wasn't even the ideal in the Old Testament. God obviously was trying to get the Old Testament, or trying to get the promised people into the promised land to get the promised Messiah to save the world. It was a means to an end.
If Yahweh were really omnipotent, he wouldn't need such a means. He could just make it happen magically. I don't know if you've heard, but I do have a Patreon.